He's almost chocolate. He's tall for now.
Yep, I mean,
Come on, man. I never used to that. I don't get to see that. Things, you know, I didn't think you'd that. Did you hear that?
oh no.
So tall. Good to see you.
Come on, Ernie.
They are. Hey, brother.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well, sir.
Yeah,
Good to see you.
Hey, Ted.
Good to see you. I see you worked your trustee.
Yeah, maybe it won't rain now.
That's it. We bring it, it won't do it. It's like Cleveland was saying about doing something. I said, well, if you do it.
Good morning.
It was.
Morning.
Good to have everybody with us this morning. This morning we are changing books out of Genesis. We are headed to Job. We're going to be in Job this morning, Job chapter 1. Job chapter 1. As I said last week, we will be starting Job today, and we will have chapter 1 this week, chapter 2 Wednesday, and then chapter 3 through chapter 42 that next Sunday. And that's a lot to cover, so plan on next Sunday being here about 7 or 8 hours. All right, just so everybody knows. It's going to take a while. But, yeah, so all right, so let's go ahead and get into our class here, get into the areas of our questions before we get into the class. First one is from Luke 1, dealing with the birth announcement of John the Baptist of Jesus Christ. It says, name the father and mother of John the Baptist, Luke 1:27. I heard it. Zechariah and Elizabeth is what I thought I heard. Exactly right. Why was Zechariah made mute?
He did not believe God.
He didn't believe the angel telling him to come from God what was going to happen, that they were going to have a child. And it was hard for him to do that, so he was mute until the birth. When did Joseph's brothers bow down to him? When they went to buy from him, exactly right. When they were there buying from him because they were starving. There was no food. Everything was in a famine. All right, now to Noah. Why was God sorry he made man? He made human beings.
Their hearts are all wicked.
Exactly right. Everybody become wicked. Even their thoughts. That's how it goes that far. You know, you think about somebody in the physical, but even their thoughts are so far. Right. So the next one. When God told Noah to enter the ark, how long did he say it would be before it began to rain? 7 days. It would be 1 week exactly. And how long did the water stay on the earth? 150 days, which is about 5 months. We see when that's actually longer for the amount of time they had to sit there. Of course, a little longer with certain things, but a little over 5 months. Next one, let's see here. All right. What happened to the raven that Noah sent out the window?
Did it come back?
You're exactly right. It didn't come back. It just didn't come back at all. It's basically what we got. How did Noah worship God after he came out of the ark? Build an altar and did a sacrifice. That was so important. Sacrifice it did of one of every clean animal is what the Bible tells us that was able to be sacrificed. He did so. The next one, the one of Noah also. What did God give Noah and his descendants for food? 2 things. Or you just say
Herbs and animals.
exactly all the herbs and all animals, of course, meat. At that point, we see that. But here's something very important. What in meat did God instruct Noah not to eat? The blood, exactly right. Need to be drained, no blood there whatsoever. Which brings us now to the book of Job. The book of Job is an interesting book, to say the least. The way I'm going to do this, and we're just going to look at chapter 1, of course, today. In 2 weeks, when we get to 3 through 42, I'm going to give you more of an introduction into a few things and then move through the rest of the book there pretty quickly. But this is one of those books we'd say interesting, and we'd say we know it's more than likely the oldest book in the Bible. What we mean by that is more than likely written during the time of Abraham. And remember, Moses wrote Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's why we call it the oldest book, because it would have been written more than likely before Moses, of course, wrote the others. And the reason we know that is because we can see that he's living under the patriarchal period, the patriarchal time. And we find that he is the priest of the family, so he's the head of the household. And during that time, very important to understand is that the head of the household, the man, he would be the one that would actually offer sacrifices for everybody's sins. He would do that. And at least they were word to do it. We don't know if everybody was doing it, but we know Job was for sure because of what we read. So Job 1 through 22, really we deal with here, we start, I guess the best way to look at it, think about it, is the invisible war. You know, it's an invisible war taking place. Everyone knows that the reality of hardships and crisis, we all understand those. We live in a world where that happens. And we've all seen and the most have experienced. And some of the obvious tragedies we know that stalk those who lived in this world during that time and also today. We see those in most of the things. There's a conflict though, all around us that we can plainly see: death, disease, wars, hardships, pain, sorrows, etc. And they're all obvious, clear, and with those of us who live in the world today of where we're at. But there's also an area of conflict that goes on around us, and it goes on around us all the time, and it's even within us, and we cannot see it, of course. And of course, we're referring to the conflict that happens in what we know as the spiritual world. Brethren, we are all engaged in a spiritual warfare, whether people believe it or not. Each and every one of us, we need to realize this. It's a war that cannot be seen, but I guarantee you this is a war that can be felt. We can feel it. We know what it does and what happens and how the devil tries to, pull us in other directions. This war has no conscientious objectors whatsoever, because everybody's a part of it. Everybody that we see and we understand. Our text we see here, we're going to look at this morning, it's kind of like the curtain's pulled back. The veil is pulled back, and we're actually able to see what goes on in this spiritual world. We're allowed to catch the glimpse of the warfare that occurred in Job's life. And we're allowed to see and understand a little of what transpired behind the scenes in this great tragedy that he goes through. And what a difference, it would have made in Job's life had he known of what was happening. If he knew exactly that it was a test, what was going on. But regardless to say, either way, he stood the test. We see that. That's the great thing here and amazing of what happens with Job. So let's consider this oldest book of the Bible. Let's go ahead and begin with Job, a godly man. And we're going to go ahead and begin in verse 1 of chapter 1. And we'll read verses 1 through 5, please.
There was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and shunned evil. And his 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. Also his possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large household, so that his man was the greatest of all the people of the east. And his sons would go and feast in their houses, each of his appointed day, and would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So it was when the day of the fasting had run their course, that Job would send and sanctify them, and that he would raise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings, according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus Job did right regularly.
Thank you. So we begin here with this area. The land of Uz has always been in question where it actually truly was, where it was at. A lot of people give it this area right in here, or actually even a little bit further. It's probably closer here by the water. We know that the Chaldeans and the Sabbas, they're important because they will come in and they're going to raid of course, Job, his family, and still everything. And it's just, and we see this was a common thing for them to come in and try to do these things with people in this area, but they usually didn't succeed. But Job's not going to have a chance in this. It's going to happen, and we know that it does. Which brings us to our first part here of chapter 1, verse 1. We kind of see Job's character very quickly, don't we? We see that he was a man of purity, a man of integrity, a very godly man, holiness. He was a man who lived this life, we see without a doubt, in the fear of the Lord. And he was a man against whom no one could make really any accusation whatsoever against. That's very remarkable to think that an individual's able to do that. Which brings us to verses 2 and 4, where we saw here basically, let me see what my thing is for. There we go. Where we see Job's things, the things that he has. Job was very wealthy in his family. We see here, the Lord had honored Job by giving him great riches and a very large, loving family. Of course, he would have had many people working for him also, because there's no way you're going to have this much livestock and only have the amount of children that he has and then them take care of it all. So we see it's very massive what we have here, nothing unusual. We know also that he does that because servants come and talk to him about things that have been going on during this horrible moment. And then in verse 5, we addressed here, we saw that Job's commitment. Job served the family, we said, as a patriarch. He was the priest of the family, and he loved his children, and he prayed for them. And notice, he offered sacrifices to temporarily atone for their sins, because that's all you could do at this moment. Remember, there wasn't full forgiveness. Jesus hadn't come yet, but Job was committed to the Lord. And it's amazing to think that he did this regularly. Got up, and according to the number of them all, it says, so it was children. And so he really cared for his children, but most importantly, he knew what God expected, and he knew what God wanted. And I think it's interesting to find where he says, it says, sanctify them. He would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be, not even pauses, but it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. And he's like, we can't have that. We can't do that. And so he makes this straight. And finally, we also see Job is very consistent. He isn't one that's just walking around doing things different, doing this day, one thing over here for God, doing something different, not for God. Job wasn't a what you would call a part-time believer. He lived and breathed every way about God, about the Lord. We see this in here. Spent in holy living, trying to do everything to avoid sin. Doesn't mean Job's perfect. We got to get that. Does not mean Job's perfect. But if you could see perfection, this man seemed like he was pretty close. He's pretty close to it, especially when we see what he's going to go through and what's going to happen. So all these things make Job, when you really look at it, what you would think of as an unlikely candidate. Now, I'm not a candidate for this, for trouble and suffering, because remember, when you go back to these times in the Bible, people believe if you had something go wrong with you, you've done what? You've sinned. You've done something against God, and that's causing all the conflict. And we know that Job's, all his so-called friends, they see it that way. Even his what sees it that way. Who else? His wife. And we see in Job 2, Job 4, Job 8, Job 15, it just goes on and on with what they're pushing him and what they're going through. And, it's been said many times about Job's friends, if you have friends like this, who needs enemies? And because that's really what it felt like. And so the fact is sometimes, brethren, we know we're going to suffer because of our sin. Without a doubt, that can happen to our foolish decisions. Sometimes we might suffer because of somebody else's foolish decision or sin they're doing. But we need to realize that, we may get caught up in ignorance, not realizing it's happening. And that's kind of where Job's friends were going. Are you sure you had to have done something? And even Job, and this was so important, notice how he said he offered sacrifices for his sons in case. You think he offered sacrifice for himself every day also? Without a doubt, without a doubt. And a lot of times that would be done first to cleanse himself in a sense, and then go through the family. And so, God, what's going to happen here is, and this is the hard part as we look at this, and it's really difficult, this book, is that God is going to allow this suffering. He's going to allow this test. He's going to allow this test to grow, actually, Job, more and more. Now remember, God knows Job. He knows his heart. He knows where he stands. The devil, this is really important to get, because we think of the devil having power and strength. The devil cannot see that. He does not have that power like God. He does not have the ability to see the future. He does not have the ability to understand Job's heart and what's there. Or else if he did, what would have Satan done with Job? What do you think he would have done? He wouldn't even, if he couldn't read his heart, why even bother with Job? Because he's like, well, he's going to win. Everything's going to be okay. So I just want us to get this as we go through these things, understanding that, even though we see Satan, it seems like he has a lot of power in this moment of what's taking place. He does not have the power that God has. It's what God allows him to have as we see this happening. So the greatest reason, we suffer from time to time, as we understand, would be as Christians, would be for the glory of God. This is what we see with Job. So I'm going to go ahead and read these for just a moment. John 9 and also John 11, please.
Now, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. When Jesus heard that, he said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it.
Thank you. So we see a couple things here. John 9, we know very quickly that, the child's not going to, be suffer because of he said, of the sin of the parents. It doesn't automatically come on. And we do know that there are things today with drugs, alcohol, and certain things that can cause problems with the child. But that child wasn't the one that sinned. And he's making it very clear. And that's why we see Jesus here saying that this sickness during those times, and we see would basically to glorify God, to bring it out of him. Jesus was able to do that in the apostles and so on. But what we don't have in Job's day, remember, Job doesn't have that. That's not what this is. It's totally different than what we've seen. It's not to confirm the word of God. It's to basically confirm God to Satan that God is right and always right in what's happening here. So it reminds us something very important, first of all, that no one is immune of suffering. No one is immune of what's going on here in the same as we see with Job, which brings us now to this unseen conflict that is going on. Because remember, while all this is taking place, can Job figure out what's happening? He's awestruck. He's like, what have I done? And he's like, and he knows himself, I've done nothing. I've been right with God and following God. So he doesn't see everything that's going on in the back picture that we can today, that we can actually see of what is there. So let's go ahead and read 6 through 12 and see this unseen conflict that's happening with God. Satan comes and angels, and we see things just happening in the background.
Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, from where did you come? So Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil? So Satan answered the Lord and said, does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you and to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is yours in your power. Only do not lay a hand on his person. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord.
Thank you. So here, while Job's just living his life, living a good life on earth, these events are taking place in the spiritual realm that we see. Events that Job cannot see, and not privy to, and just all this conflict that goes there. So it brings us to verse 6. As we think about verse 6, those who came to God. So here we have these angelic beings, it says, and make an appearance before God. Apparently there are, to give an account of their service to him, so it's happening in the background. We certainly do not understand all that is taking place, but when you first time you've ever read Job, you're probably mystified, kind of like the appearance of being Satan there, Satan coming before God, because Satan, being within whom sin originated, appears before the Lord. And we know that Satan, the most ungodly being in the universe, stands before actually God himself. And this is just an incredible statement. Because after all, God, the Bible tells us, is so holy that he cannot even do what? can't even look upon sin. And Hebrews 1 that's why this is a puzzling matter here of what's happening here. I mean, was he actually seeing Satan, or was he actually talking to him? It says he comes before him. There could be different thoughts with that. It could be where he sees him, or he's just speaking to him, just different things about. But whatever it is, we just can't answer it. But yet here's Satan. Here comes Satan there for him. And so you see verses 8, it's God's going to talk to him, the acknowledgement that goes along here, that Satan appears, his presence. And Satan's acknowledged by God. That's what's so important to see here, that God calls him really to account of his activities. Now I want you to notice what it says. Satan doesn't say, oh, I was just spending some time in this town. What did he say he was doing?
Going everywhere.
Going everywhere, walking upon the earth to and fro, So we need to realize that, Satan is out there. The Bible says, like a roaring lion, isn't he? And all you're about to say that, like a roaring lion, seeking to whom he may devour. And we see this. So, I don't want us to get bogged down on the thought, really, how can Satan be there with it? That's not really the thought to go on here. Brethren, we need to keep in mind that the devil is a created being. His authority and power are limited by the sovereign Almighty God. And we see that. And we'll notice as we go through this, notice he comes to him, but who speaks first? Always. Who speaks first here? God. Chapter 1, verse 7, also chapter 2, verse 2, you'll see that. And then the one that speaks last, of course, we would see would be Satan. 1:12, answering God, talking to him. And then chapter 2, 6, the same thing. We see with all this going on in the presence of the Lord. So in verses 9 through 12, any comments for me? We want 9 and 12. 9 and 12. I already took Dad's comment. Okay. All right, 9 through 12. We see here that the accusation comes out. Here it comes. When Satan is asked about Job, Satan reveals his true identity really quick. Really quickly, his true identity. And he lives up to his name. Remember, the word Satan, when you look at it, it has a meaning. Just like every name in the Bible has a meaning. It means the adversary, the one who stands in opposition to another. He doesn't only stand in opposition to Job and all of his family and every other person on this earth, but he completely stands in opposition to who? God. 100%. And God knows, knows it and knows what Satan wants to do and realizes it. So Satan tells the Lord, the only reason Job serves you is why? Because he's blessed him. You've protected him. When you talk about a hedge around somebody, that's what he means by you've been protected in all these ways. And he says, and unless you remove your hand from Job, Job would never, never leave you, never move away from you. But I'll tell you what, you take those things from him, he's going to go against you that fast. He's going to curse you. He's going to deny you, everything with it. And, it's quite an accusation to come from Satan as he's still standing there, and dealing with the people that are following God, looking to God. And as we see all this happening, so some have said Satan was kind of like a grave digger because he was always trying to dig up dirt on the saints. He was trying to find something, on Job here, and he really couldn't. All he thought was, and this, I just want to show you this. I want to show you how ignorant, I guess you would say in a sense. I don't want to say Satan doesn't know what he's doing, but he is ignorant to a point. And here it is. He thinks all he has to do is take away what God blesses somebody with, and then they'll fold. That's what he believes. You know why? Because that's what he did. That's exactly what he did. And we see those angels that followed him as they started that war in heaven and all that went on. But that's what he expects. But I guarantee you that Satan has learned over the years how many Christians he has messed with, he has tried to hurt, tried to destroy, and they stood the test of time because they were able to do like Job. And that's what we find here. So I want us to notice something that it says in Revelation chapter 12, verse 10. And someone going to read this for us, please.
Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren who accused them before our God day and night has been cast down.
Thank you. Who's this talking about? Talking about the devil. Talking about Satan. I mean, whenever you see the word accuser, we see this here, even in the face of accusations, the saints of God, here's the important part. We all have an advocate. We have an advocate. And how do we know that? Because we know that we have an advocate that pleads our case in heaven. And who is that one? It's Jesus we see before God. Someone go and read for us, please. 1 John 2, verse 1.
My little children, these things I write to you, so that you may not sin. And if anyone sinned, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous.
Thank you. And we see that. So, in Job's day, Jesus, we didn't know Jesus like we do today. But Jesus was still around. We need to remember that. Jesus has never been created. He always was, and just like always is. And so we see that. So, in a sense, here at the same time, even what Job's going through, Jesus is in the background also of realizing what's here and what's needed. And remember, all these people from the past, all their sins are being pushed forward to that time of Christ on the cross. And if they're following God, their sins will be forgiven too, just like that we see of those today. So all this happening we've come up with this unbelievable crisis. Crisis is ahead. It's right there ahead of you, Job. Get ready for it, Job chapter 1, verses 13 through 19. And we're going to go and read about this. Let's see what happens and how bad this situation is. Someone go and read for us, please.
Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them. Then when the Sabines raided them and took them away, indeed they have killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another also came and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants, and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you.
I'm going to step right there for just a second, Brother Clifford. So I want you to think about this for a moment. Here he's had two come, and he's lost quite a bit already, right? Quite a bit. And you think at this point you're like, oh no, what? We need to take care of this. Every time Job was probably getting ready to take care of the situation, what happens? Another servant comes to him, something else happens. Brother Clifford, you continue to read, please.
While he was still speaking, another also came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels and took them away. Yes, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another also came and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And suddenly a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house. And it fell on the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you.
Thank you. Just the first one, you're going to be upset, you're going to feel terrible what's happened. Then another one, and then finally your children. And it sounds like the majority of your servants. I want you to think about this for a moment. How could how can anybody walk away from this? Just make it through this. And people do. There are people today that lose everything, and they still make it because they rely on God. So as much as he can, Satan doesn't only, and I want you to catch this, God told Satan to go ahead. Satan just say, okay, I'll start with a little bit, like this. How much does Satan throw on Job?
Everything at one time.
Everything at one time, just did it all. And you see, here's the point, is Satan, he does know, of course, that Job is faithful to God because he told God that. He knows very clear. So he's in his processes thinking, this man can't be dealt with just a little bit of pain. I've got to go full bore on him. And that's what we see happening. Dad, go ahead.
And you notice too that the servant, when he came to tell Job about the fire, he said the fire came from God.
Yep.
So here Satan is laying the plot that, hey, God is doing this to you. And so you need to turn your back on him.
That's exactly right. That's Satan's whole, as he is, I guess you say, the way he's about and everything, is he wants everybody to think either you have all the time in the world or it's God's fault. With everything else. And it's one of those two. Why would we say you have all the time in the world? Because as we continue to look at time, it means you don't need God. You'll think you're okay forever. You may not be. But here's, as we see it's happening with Job. I'm sure Job thought, my life is really good. I'm going to continue to bless God. And as long as I'm blessing God, God's going to do what? He's going to take care of me. Well, we're going to see here more that God still is taking care of Job. And once again, we don't understand why all this happened, what went on here. He, everything he loved, everything that was dear to him was dearly taken away. Which brings verse 13 and 17 that we said a moment ago is the scope of the crisis. As the crisis of Job's life unfolds, He hears, first of all, the theft and the destruction of everything he's worked for his whole life to accumulate. Because I guarantee that didn't come overnight, all that he has. And it was, remember what did it say about him in the Far East compared to all other people?
Riches.
He was the richest. He was the wealthiest. He was the best off than everybody that we see. And so here Job is torn down, finds himself broken and battered and nothing left, of his former glory. It's all gone. You're no longer the richest man. Now I don't know where he stands at, but people are thinking, you're the worst off because you've done something horrible against God. Just terrible with all this happening. And that's what we see. Dad, go ahead.
Job probably, thinking, and this is just a hypothetical, that, well, okay, I've just heard I've lost all my cattle, I've lost all of this, but then the real problem comes when it's children, because God didn't say, don't harm the children,
Right.
just don't harm Job.
Can't touch Job.
And he lost them.
Yeah.
And that had to be, you might use the figure of the icing on the cake. It just really would put him down.
Definitely. I mean, it's terrible to lose all of our possessions, but and we know that he loved his children so much because it said he did sacrifices every day for them, basically, or it says every morning he got up and did it on a regular basis. And so it is. I mean, that would just be the blow, the crush, you think, that would finish him. And just when Job thought, as we said, things would get better, devastating as we hear, ripped his heart out of his chest. With his family, he was told that all 10, remember it's 10 of them, all 10 of your children died at one time. They all died together, and the collapse of the house. So as we look at this, we need to ask ourselves the source of the crisis, the source of what's happening here. Once again, we look at Job, we can look at it today. If we didn't read the story, we would have to ask, do you think it is a mere coincidence that in each case, only one was left to go and bring the news to Job? Think about it. Only one servant is sent. Because usually you think a bunch of them running, they're coming. So it tells us that Satan, here it is also, Satan, basically giving enough news to allow one servant to go, and we see this happening, bringing all this forth through this. And I say this, we say Satan allowed one servant. I don't believe it was really Satan. I think Satan was doing everything. I believe it was God. God allowed that to come to Job, to allow him to understand what was happening and what was going on. And each time as we see the messenger came to Job, Satan, knew that he would break down. And when the wealth was gone, we see Satan turn the attack up, as we said, the others, and that was the devil's entire purpose. He wanted to get Job to curse God and be done with him. And because he knew, and he even goes a little step further. The Satan knows if he starts to win, if he starts to capture somebody to start following him, to follow God, what do you think Satan's going to do? He's going to turn up the heat a little more, isn't he? And that's what we see with this. Because he thinks he's in the right process. We see all these things that start happening then after this to Job himself. And, he's just not allowed to be killed. We know that without a doubt. And so Satan, but doesn't realize was that even he and his scheme, it was all part of God's plan right here. And that's hard to get. It was part of God's plan to increase his glory through his work of Job's life. And that is why God took ownership of the entire affair of Job. He does that in chapter 2, verse 3. God says it was all him. And we see this. And not that he did these evil things to Job, but that he allowed Job to be tested. And Satan thought, hey, this is all me. Remember, Satan, that's what he wants. It's all my glory. Look what I'm doing. And all along, however, the Lord allowed the event to take place. So what I want you to get from the story is the truth that God is not in control of most situations. God's in control of every situation. And like I said, we can't explain why things happen. I can just say this. In this world today, we say, well, all that's a test. Not everything's a test. We know this world is full of diseases. This world is full of sin. This world is full of cases of things happening to people all the time and that we can't explain. It's because we don't live in a perfect world. And that's what happens. So, God, as he went through this, you remember, God didn't just give Satan, do whatever you want. God gave him a set of rules. He said, this is what you're allowed to do. And you're not allowed to do this. And Satan would follow that, of course, because he doesn't have power over God. So when we see these things happening, even though those terrible things are happening, there's going to be good that's going to be found in this. We don't see it right now, and I guarantee you Job didn't see it at all. None whatsoever. But I want you to think about today. You know, we always, you know, why was this book put in the Bible? Why do we think this book was put in the Bible?
For us.
It was put for you and I, for all human beings, to understand that, look, you can go some of the worst suffering in your life, but you can still stand by God. You can make it through this. And God will take care of you through it. As hard as it is, it'll happen. Dad, go ahead.
Too, you mentioned that Satan did this, but he didn't stop.
Right.
Once Satan gets a hold of your mind and your heart to begin to turn, and he realizes that, like you said, he's going to turn up the heat. Even today, this book is for our learning and understanding that, yeah, you may face these kinds of things, but you can't let Satan get hold of your love and trust in God, because God is very explicit, even in the New Testament, you know, that we are to love Him and trust Him and have faith in Him. And when we start doubting that, that's when Satan knows he's got an opportunity to go in and do more to pull you away from God, because that's his ultimate goal.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, and we see a book like this, you know, it reminds us, we see Job, is that, you know, when we have all this happening, you don't have to give up. You know, and this is what we see. Job could have gave up in a heartbeat. Even his own wife told him to give up. Actually, she said, curse God and do what? Die. I mean, I'm like, wow. You know, and you see that. But what I'm trying to get at is, you know, this is an example of no matter how hard, we may think we're at the end of it. You know, I'm up here. I can't take any more, God. You said you would never allow me to get what I can't handle, and this is just too much. And what do we see with Job? That we can always come through it, can't we? We can. We just have to have our faith remain with God. And in fact, that's why Romans 8:28 and 9, we have these verses here where it talks about that goodness, that, you know, that good that is found in it somewhere of what's taking place. So someone go and read this for us, please.
And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to His purpose. For whom He foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among many brethren.
Thank you. I want us to notice here, God isn't saying it's good that you're going through things. That's not what He's saying here. He's not saying it's a good thing that you go through suffering or testing or whatever it may be. That's not what He's getting at. He's saying even though those things happen, there's something in there that can work out together for the good of God. And we see that. So, you know, we can have our accidents, our bad luck, our mistakes. And, you know, as for all of us, you know, we need to allow ourselves to rest in the arms of the Divine Father and of Christ, and know that He is in control of our life, even when it seems like we're not at times. Which now brings us to the last two verses here, verses 20 through 22. If someone will read those for us, please. Now remember, this is where Job's at now. All this has happened really, really bad in one day. In one, I mean, not even, it's like a moment after moment right there, real quick in a day. And so someone go and read 20 through 22, please.
Then Job arose, tore his robe, and shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshipped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And all this, Job did not sin, nor charge God with wrong.
Isn't that pretty remarkable? I mean, it just shows us what human beings can take and what we can stand up against and still stay with God. And after all that, you know, Job does this, and he made it very clear. He's basically saying, "I came into this world with what? Nothing. I can go out of this world with nothing. But even that being the case, I'm still going to bless the name of God. And I'm still going to look to Him and follow Him." And that's what we see. Now, go ahead.
It wasn't that he wasn't upset or angry, because he was in a sense.
Yes.
I mean, the idea at that time of the tearing of the robe meant great distress.
Yeah.
You know, you were just at almost your wit's end, and also the shaving of his head. All of that indicates the pain that he was feeling. But like you said, even with all of that, he didn't blame God. how often do people today blame God for the littlest thing?
Yeah, yeah.
And rather than realizing it could be just because of the world that we live in, or it could be because of Satan. In either case, we don't blame God for those things.
That's exactly right. You know, and that was Satan's whole purpose here. It wasn't just to get Job to sin, but it was him to charge God with everything. You know, it was your fault, God. You did this to me. Why are you doing this? And that's what Satan wanted in this point. So as we get ready to close, brethren, we know this visible war is being raged even around you and I today. It just Satan wants our souls. And it's not as much our physical that he wants. You know, he that's how he wants to hurt us, but he wants our souls. And that's what he was hoping for with Job here. And we got a long ways to go with Job. We're going to see Job stand through it. Job gets, I guess, Job gets about this close. I mean, to almost, you know, sinning against God, you know, basically, you know, charging God with wrong, but he doesn't. And that's the amazing part about all this. And so as we see this lesson of Job's life and the recipe for success in the invisible war, I would say this: when we run into troubles and we think it's just too much, we just can't handle it anymore, just think about Job. In fact, go read Job and allow it to wake us up. And that first chapter will. And you know, even today, people that deal with things in our life as Christians, and many of us go through things, the thing, and we work through it. Here it is. Job is an example for us. I want you to think about how many members of the Lord's church today are examples to others because of what they've gone through and how they've kept their confidence and have kept their will and faith in God. And that allows us, you know, when things may happen to us too, to be able to do that. And that's the great thing about the family of God that we see and that we observe and that we have in His Word. And we'll go to close there. All right, thanks for your time.